The true heights of certain professional wrestlers has been a debate since the inception of the sport. We can only go by what they tell us, and that is, of course, a build height. Now, during the course of this video, I will give my account my personal opinion on how tall certain guys are, and there will be some well-known faces like this guy here, and some not so well-known gentlemen like this guy here. And I will start off with the first set of guys, beginning with Ernie Ladd. And all of these gentlemen, in my opinion, were anywhere from 6 feet 8 inches to 7 feet, I guess. Maybe even a little under 7 feet for the tallest gentleman. And Ernie Ladd, I believe, was 6 feet 8 to 6 feet 9 inches. Now, there is some credibility lent to this. He, of course, did many matches with Andre the Giant, who was very tall himself, especially when you can see the top of his afro. That would have definitely lent him a couple of inches. But Ernie Ladd, he also played football professionally. And there's a legitimacy when it comes to professional sports, and he was also billed at 6 feet 9 inches as far as his football career was concerned. But anyway, you be the judge, and let me know your opinion on each of these guys in the comment section below when this is all through. This is Glenn Jacobs. I believe he stood anywhere from 6 feet 8 inches all the way to 6 feet 10. If you don't recognize him, he also played a gimmick, a dentist of all things. It's a pretty terrible gimmick for a professional wrestler. He was known as Isaac Yankem. He was then repackaged as the Fake Diesel. Now, those were a couple of terrible gimmicks, but they gave him a brand new gimmick a couple of years later, and he was known as Kane. And he still actually holds that moniker, Kane. That really was a good gimmick for this guy, and kudos to him. Just a giant. And who could mention Kane without mentioning his brother, of course, the Undertaker, perhaps one of the most famous wrestlers of all time. This man stood anywhere from 6 feet 8 all the way to 6 feet 10 inches, much like his younger brother. Oh, did I mention they had a different father and a different mother? Of course, they were not real brothers. Anyway, guys, this is the next gentleman on the list. This is Giant Baba. He was a Japanese wrestler. He was billed at 7 feet plus, depending on the match, but a more legitimate height would be 6 feet 10 inches. And you can definitely see there was some legitimacy there, standing next to certain guys that were billed at 6 feet 8 inches, but we're nowhere near that actual height. But anyway, that's a debate for another day. This is Robert Millett, a Canadian wrestler, billed at 7 feet tall. He was known as Kurgan in the WWF or WWE, whatever you would want to call it. I believe his true height to be 6 feet 10 inches. And this here is the gentleman from the beginning of the video. This is Matt Morgan. He was a good solid 6 feet 10 inches, billed at 7 feet. He may even have been 6 feet 11 inches. There was another dude that Matt Morgan hung out with. This was Nathan Jones. He may even been an inch taller than Matt Morgan. They were roughly the same height. So he was 6 feet 10, 6 feet 11 inches. What a powerhouse was Nathan Jones. Now, a lot of these guys had athletic builds. Let's switch over for a second to a build such as this. This is Uncle Elmer. Man, this guy must have been some heavy on the scale, standing at least 6 feet 8, 6 feet 9 inches. Guy was billed at 6 feet 10 inches, of course. Must have been well over 500 pounds. And there was another gentleman, not to be confused with this guy. This is Giant Haystacks. He may even been an inch taller than Uncle Elmer. He sure was probably heavier than him. A much bigger stature. Just a true giant. Now we're getting into the more legitimate guys that were so close to 7 feet, it's not even close. This was Diesel. I believe he was slightly taller than The Undertaker. They had many matches together. He was repackaged in WCW, known as Kevin Nash. Big Sexy. Anyway, very, very tall gentleman. This is Big Cass, a more modern wrestler, and it is very hard for these guys to hide from faking their heights. So I think it would probably be a legitimate height of 7 feet tall. That's his build height. This guy here, he'll be the last guy on this list. Big Show. There was a lot of the times in his career where he was billed up to 7 feet 4 inches, but I believe a 7 feet even status would be a more legitimate height. Speaking of his wrestling skills, one of the best giants, for sure, in my opinion. Now, this next group of gentlemen, I believe, are truly over 7 feet tall, and we're going to begin with Ron Reese. He was billed at 7 feet 1 inch, and I think that was pretty legitimate. Stood next to the Big Show several times, and definitely was a little bit taller than him. He was also known as the Yeti, and if you had a chance to watch this performance of that gimmick, it was very terrible and very humorous, actually. Anyway, 7 feet 1 would be a legitimate height for him, I believe. The Great Khali. This man is billed at 7 feet 1, 7 feet 2 inches, depending on where you look. He was obviously taller than the Big Show, so there was a definite legitimacy. He would stand next to guys like Kane and tower over him. And another point that I would like to make about Kane, I don't think he's 7 feet tall, because if he was, he would be almost the same height as Khali, correct? And this is where I get a lot of my knowledge, just scaling other wrestlers with other tall guys. Anyway, let's carry on with this list. This is Raja Lion, not very well known among modern day wrestling fans. He did not compete that long in pro wrestling. This is him in a match with Giant Baba, who was clearly almost 7 feet tall. And I have to say, Raja, he was towering over Giant Baba. So I believe the 7 feet 2 inch build height of Raja would be probably correct. This is Giant Silva. In my opinion, the WWE or F really dropped the ball on this guy. He had unlimited potential. He was 7 feet 3 inches, and in my opinion, that was a legitimate height. He also did some MMA. Here he is standing nose to nose with, who's this, Aki Bono? Not a very good MMA fighter at all, but he was a tall man himself. Anyway, let's carry on this list with some more less-known wrestlers, perhaps. This is Kurt Zehe. His ring name was the Gargantuan. And if you look him up, he had a legitimate height of 7 feet 2 inches. And of course, a lot of people don't count him because he's not a modern-day wrestler, but we have to open our eyes to the past. He was, in fact, a professional wrestler, 7 feet 2 inches. This is Killer Kowalski Jr. I just stumbled upon this guy, and he was not much information to be able to write up anything on this guy, but he was clearly well over 7 feet tall. He did a match with King Kong Bundy, and looked like he was almost 2 feet taller than King Kong. So let's face it, guys, he was a 7-foot-plus wrestler. This list would not be complete without the most famous giant ever in the history of not just pro wrestling, but humanity. This is Andre Roussimoff, the French giant, also known as Andre the Giant. Now, I could have easily put him in the first list of gentlemen, because a lot of people say he was only 7 feet, maybe even under. I believe in his younger years, he did tower over 7 feet tall, at least a little bit. He was probably 7'1", 7'2". Clearly in his older years, his later years, he buckled in his height, and he lost inches, guys. But he was still the tallest man that he ever was in the ring with, so nobody really stood eye to eye to him, even at his shorter height. And I believe 6 feet 10, 6 feet 11 inches would have been a proper height for this version of Andre. But hey, it is debatable, but I personally think he was 7 feet plus in his younger years. Now, before I get to my final list of the tallest wrestlers ever to grace the square circle, I would like to give honorable mention to a few other performers, namely Hulk Hogan. He was billed at 6 feet 8 inches, even as low as 6 feet 7. I believe a more legitimate height would be 6 feet 5, maybe even as low as 6 feet 4.5. Now, I know I may receive some negative reaction towards that, but I believe it to be the truth. As well as Scott Hall. He was billed at 6 feet 8 also, as low as 6 feet 7. but I believe a 6 feet 5 inch height would be also legit for him. Big John Studd. He was clearly a giant of a man, a little bit taller than Hulk Hogan, but no more than 1, maybe 2 inches, so perhaps 6 feet 6, maybe even 6 feet 7 would be the height of Big John Studd in my opinion. Psycho Sid, another very tall guy that just missed the grade, I believe. I think 6 feet 7 inches, maybe even a stretch for him. 6 feet 5.5, 6 feet 6, probably a more legitimate height. Now here's Braun Strowman. He's listed at 6 feet 8 inches, and he's clearly taller than most of, if not all, the WWE performers, aside from the Big Show, of course. But perhaps 6 feet 7. He could have made the first list. But anyway, guys, that's the honorable mentions. Now let's have a look at the finalists. This is Silo Sam, and thus far, none of the other gentlemen on this list come close to the height of this man. He reached a legitimate 7 feet 7 inches in my opinion. He's not what you would call a giant physical force when you look at the muscularity department, but nonetheless, he did in fact reach the height of 7 feet 7 inches. This is Giant Gonzalez. He also stood a legitimate height of 7 feet 7 inches. Just a true giant for sure. And it was obvious by the way he would tower over gentlemen like the Undertaker that this was a legitimate height. Prior to being Giant Gonzalez, he used the name L.A. Gante and wrestled in the late 80s to early 90s in the WCW. This gentleman is known as Paul Bunyan, and fittingly so, he stood an incredible 7 feet 7 inches, matching the previous other two gentlemen. His real name was Max Palmer. Other than professional wrestling, he was also an actor, and he was not exactly what you would call a physical force, much like Silo Sam. So out of the three, I would say L.A. Gante, or Giant Gonzalez, as he was known, is probably the more reputable professional wrestler. But nonetheless, each one of these gentlemen reached 7 feet 7 inches. Now, before I get to the finalist, and the man that I consider the tallest man in history to ever have wrestled, I have to say a lot of people do not consider this man a legitimate professional wrestler. But anyway, I had to get that out there. This is Edward Boopre. He stood 8 feet 3 inches. He was born way back in 1881, and he was a circus strongman, but he did sign contracts and wrestled many matches, including a match against Louis Cyr, another strongman, but like I mentioned earlier, he was less likely to have made a living off wrestling, much like the other gentlemen on this list. But he did, however, wrestle, so I consider him the tallest man in history to have wrestled at 8 feet 3 inches, and it was a legitimate height. He was measured many times by many professionals. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this list, and subscribe to the channel for more wrestling content. And remember, keep everything on the mat, and have a great day, guys.